Yes, please go ahead, Professor Sinha.
Okay. We're very pleased that this afternoon we have with us Hardik Shah. He works for American Structure Point, and he has been there ever since he left Purdue, if I remember correctly. He,
That's correct.
yeah, and I hear that he's doing well, and he has some insight at how you, when you submit your resume, that will surface to the top, at least get attention. It says foot in the door. That's pretty good, foot in the door. But I want to see, hear from him, what are the things that show up, in your resume that catch attention. And just a few seconds of about Hardik. Hardik came. He has that distinction. He's MS2. He has two MS, no, MS squared. He has one MS in materials at Purdue, and then he also, after that, he decided to do masters in transportation engineering, and that's when he worked with us, myself, Samuel, and he took courses from all kinds of places. And I just heard that, or learned, or remember, or reminded that Nadia also started more or less same time that Hardik was here. I was trying to figure out what year he was here, and I also caught the number 2005. He got his master's, the first one or second one, I don't know. But around that time, it seems like we are doing a lot of work on revenue and need studies, etc. So with that, I will let, I'm very pleased again, as I mentioned, that Hardik is here, and we are anxious to hear from him. And I will let Abdullah make a more formal introduction if needed.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you, Professor Sinha. So again, we are pleased to have Hardik here with us. Hardik is the National Practice Director and the Traffic Group Leader at American Structure Point, a 500-plus employee consulting firm headquartered in Indianapolis with 16 offices across the U.S. He has 15 years of professional experience in the transportation industry, including 2 years as a research assistant at Purdue University. He is actively involved with design, development, and management of traffic engineering services for various public, private, healthcare, and educational institution clients. He is an active member of ITE and has served the Institute in various capacities, from the Purdue Student Chapter Local Indiana section to the Great Lakes District Director on the ITE International Board of Directors, and is currently serving as the Vice Chair of Consultants Council. He is also a member of ASCE, TRB, and ATPIO. In 2009, Hardik was invited to join on a high-level transportation systems delegation to India, led then by AASHTO's Executive Director, John Harsley. Hardik is also the recipient of the ITE International Young Professionals Scholarship Award, as well as ENR Midwest's 2019 Top 20 Under 40 Young Professionals in the Industry. He holds a Bachelor of Engineering degree from Nirma University in India and dual master's degrees from Purdue University. And with that, again, we are pleased to have you here with us, Hardik, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sinha and Abdullah and Professor Darcy Bullock as well. I appreciate that kind introduction. Dr. Sinha, you did take me back the memory lane as well. You're right about the 2 masters. I think I might be the only one in civil who probably got 2 masters. But I really had the fortune of working with Dr. Sinha in the cool civil engineering department and other professors at Purdue. And I think there are a lot of fun memories from Purdue. So really glad to be here. And I do want to maybe mention one more thing as well. Abdullah, thank you again for the introduction. And thanks for reaching out to me about giving this talk. And I think it is quite an honor to do that, giving it back to Purdue. And I actually started with Purdue ITE like almost 16, 17 years back. So it's really good to see how this group has really thrived and really enlarged, and amazing to see that the Purdue student chapter of IT is doing pretty amazing things. And I do follow you guys regularly on the amazing activities that you guys are actually going through. And I really want to just say that keep up all the good work you're doing for the profession as well. So I think when Abdullah actually reached out to me about maybe giving this talk, I really felt that I can actually share some of my perspectives from the hiring end, because we actually do get involved a lot. I think as Abdullah mentioned, American Structure Point is a growing company. And I think when I started with the firm 15 years back, I think we were about less than 200 employees, and we are now over 500 employees. So you can imagine that we have had a lot of growth during that time. And I think with growth, obviously, you're adding a lot of employees, and screening through and the hiring process is obviously something that is evolving over a period of time. And I just felt that I'll provide my perspectives on what really are the key things that you need to look out for when you're trying to actually write your resume, because resume is really that first thing that you need to do to really help you line up an interview. And I think it's important that you put the time and effort to really go through that as well. So I really want to start with things that really defines what your career path is going to look like. And I think the things that really comes to my mind, and this is kind of like, again, my perspective based on how I have seen my career kind of like evolved over this last 15 years from Purdue and being at Structure Point for this 15 years since I graduated. You really need to identify your passion and the area of interest that you have, whatever that area would be within civil engineering, whether you are an expert in transportation, you're an expert in maybe environmental geotech. Can you guys hear me okay? I heard some feedback, so I just wanted to pause right there.
You're good, Hardik. We can hear you.
Okay, awesome. So I think that's really one of the key aspects when you're looking at, so whatever area that you are working on, make sure that you are really putting your 100%, more than 100% on that, because I think that's what is really going to help you define what you want to do in your career down the road as well once you graduate. I think it's really important to get advice from your trusted advisor. I think we have great faculties at Purdue, and whatever university you might be working at, make sure that you are actually working very closely with your mentors and your advisors to really guide you in the right direction. Not to mention, obviously, your parents and your coach. I think that they are really the important pieces of the puzzle as you kind of like really go towards defining your career. Also, make sure that you are taking advantage of the campus recruiting resources. I know Purdue actually has what I remember is the Center for Career Opportunities. I believe it's still a program that is pretty important, and I think it has grown over a period of time. I can tell you, I landed my job that I have right now was through a career fair, and I think it was also, I remember it was 2004, December is when I actually was invited to basically go for an interview with American Structure Point, because my resume actually popped out from what I had submitted through the career fair. So I think it's really important that you are taking advantage of the resources that are available out at the university. I think the networking events are very important as well. I think there are a lot of events happening on campus which may be geared towards technical or maybe non-technical, and there are a lot of external events as well, which you can lead to, like educational conferences. And when you get the opportunity to present the work that you are doing and maybe the things that you are working on, whether you're doing a research or whether you're helping out on a research, I think those things really speaks volume. And I think it's important that you do take advantage of those networking opportunities as well. And I think the internships and co-ops are kind of like maybe again a byproduct. To get the internship is kind of like getting a job. But if you have one, and if you're fortunate enough to have one, make sure that you're making the best out of it as well. And really, I think everything that I just stated, it really starts with building your resume or writing your resume. It's the first rate or the first impression resume is what is really going to get you into all these cool, amazing things as well. So I do want to share one thing, and this is also something I probably felt when I was trying to write my resume for the first time back in 2004, 2005. And it can actually feel like taking a medicine. Sometimes it feels it's unpleasant, but it's really necessary because I think that's really something that's going to help you get through the process. It can be a little bit frustrating and painful if you're not kind of like a grammar person and you don't want to really get into maybe putting something that is maybe a one-pager or a two-pager together. I think it can really feel a little bit intimidating and daunting at times. And I think the most important reason why it's mainly because we are asked to write maybe a convincing one-page, what I would call it as a sales pitch about yourself. And you would think, I mean, it's kind of like easy to do, right? You can really talk about it. Well, once it gets down to you start putting things on paper. You start putting maybe pencil to the paper, and maybe these days I think it's more about as you are trying to kind of like type up that resume on the Word. I think it can actually feel a little bit intimidating that how can you write cool things about yourself? Well, I think it's really important, and I think it needs to be relevant as well. So it is important that you are investing in writing this, what I would call it as the first impression resume, because companies are only going to know what that piece of paper, whether it's electronic or it's a hard copy. And these days, I think we do a lot of things electronically. But I think that's the only information that the companies or the hiring managers would have, which tells them about yourself. And until you are really interviewed, you are just that information and impressions your resume actually conveys. So think about it from that perspective, that you do want to show yourself as someone who really embraced basically doing what they are doing in their profession, and then also making sure that you are trying to really be appropriate about the type of job that you are going after. And I think the most important thing is the number one goal for the resume is going to be really help you line up those interviews, right? I mean, that's the most important part. And I think that's really the reason why you need to invest that time in really creating and developing and putting time and effort to really put a nice resume together. The other thing to keep in mind is, and this is something I didn't know until I started kind of like getting into the hiring position as well, and basically interviewing folks and trying to get people involved on the team and basically hiring people on the team, that it does take, you have a lot of things going on through your regular business work and the production work. And I think hiring the right talent is also an important part of growing your business. But at the same time, there are a lot of resumes that could be floating around. And I think that's where you really need to make sure that yours is really the one that can pop out as like that first impression, that someone really wants to invite you for an interview to really take that next step in your career. Some of the do's, and I think this is something that I will go through based on my experience of reviewing many resumes over the last 10 plus years. I've had the opportunity to do that and hire people within the team and the group that we have. And it is really important that your resume is very clear and concise, because I think that's really allowing the hiring manager, if you can imagine, normally a hiring manager would have maybe a max of 2 minutes to skim through and scan through a resume. So I think it's really important that you are really getting to the point on what you want to convey, what is the most important thing for you that you really want the hiring manager or the employer to know about you, so that they can actually invite you for an interview. And I think it comes with some of these other things that are tied together. You need to be organized. Make sure that your resume is really easy to read. You don't want to make it too clumsy. It needs to be really clean enough in a way that you are not trying to make it too wordy. Put more time and effort on kind of like going through multiple drafts of your resume. It's really important, because when you are putting this together in a snapshot in time, you can miss out on things that you really want to add. You can probably add more things than you need to. So I think it's important that you are putting the time and effort to really review through and go through the resume and kind of like go through that draft proofreading is really the important part. You need to make sure that once you are at a stopping point, give it another read, maybe give it a couple of days before you actually go back and look at it again. I think that's really going to allow you to screen out on important things that are relevant to the job that you might be applying for, as well as relevant to the work and the profession that you are in. You also want to make it very, what I would call it, dynamic by using words that convey action. You don't really want to say that I did this, I did that. I think it's important that you are putting more in terms of the adjectives or verbs that are more geared towards action. You either add things like advised, presented, developed, invented, created. I think those are really maybe the buzzwords that would really catch the eye of maybe a hiring manager or an employer who are looking for people to really match with the job profile that they may have as well, and the skill sets that actually goes with it. I think it's also important that you lead with your strongest suite. So obviously, your education, the university you go to, I think those are really important components, your GPA. But I think the work experience is really critical. And I understand that if you are an entry level trying to look out for your first job, it's going to be tough to get that work experience in there. And I think that's where it's important that you do talk about like your involvement either in the class activities you had, either maybe projects that you might have taken as you are taking courses at Purdue or whatever universities you are going to. Make sure that you do make the most out of that and really show the emphasis on some of those, what I would call it as the school and the community activities, because those are also important aspects that allows someone to know that you have been in a position to really deal with people, maybe work with people, work in a team environment. I think those are really some of the important attributes, even if you don't have a direct work experience, but I think that will help you land an interview and ultimately land a job. And I think it's important to really talk about your accomplishments. I think this is your time to really shine and really tell the other side why they should call you for an interview and why they should hire you because of the skills that you have and the accomplishments that you actually have made as you are going through your educational career, or maybe it might be some sort of extracurricular activities that you are involved with. You also need to make sure that your resume speaks to the job that you're applying for. And I think what that means is people may not be exactly, and I think this goes back to maybe the first bullet point that I had on one of my slides, that it's important to really follow your passion. And sometimes I think you may think that maybe there are multiple areas that you can really see your career going into. And I think it's okay. Maybe if you're not very sure, you may be applying for multiple different options. I think it's good to have that goal. But when you're early in your career, sometimes transportation is a big area. And within transportation, let's say you may be interested in design versus maybe interested in the traffic engineering and the operations side. And if you're not sure, I think it's okay to kind of like look out for those different options, but make sure that you are also trying to cater your resume based on the educational experience that you have as well, that really meets the requirement for a job. Because I think if that's not going to, if you're applying at a position or for a job just for the sake of applying without having the resume that has the direct relevance to the job, you're probably not even going to get that interview call. So I think it's important that you do your research. And I think what I mean by 3 R's in that is you need to research about the company you're applying for. You need to research about the job that you're applying for. And I think you also need to really invest in research on yourself. And I think what I mean by that is you need to make sure that you are putting that effort in trying to put down or jot down your goals that may match that particular opening. Sometimes you may think that you probably want to explore your career in 2 or 3 different areas, and you want to spend maybe the first 3 or 4 years of your career doing one thing, and then maybe you want to move on to doing something else. And I think that's okay. And I think those are the things that you need to really look out for. I think, as we all know, and this is something that we actually use as well within the company, and I think a lot of big companies actually do this, you need to really look out for using the keywords and the skills that are important for a job, because it's important that those are scannable. And what I mean by that is nowadays there are a lot of computer programs that can actually screen candidates and their resumes based on some of the buzzwords or maybe the keywords that kind of like matches the profile of a given job. And I think it's important that that's where you're doing your research, so that if it really gets to be more of an interview, that you're going to be lined up either by applying directly onto a company's website versus maybe a recruiter reaching out to you, or maybe a word of mouth. I think it's still important. Word of mouth will at least get you the interview, but I think when you are going through all the other options, it is important that your resume really carries that weight as well. And I think, as I said before, it's not all about the technical aspects that you want to really highlight on your resume. It's important that you really talk about any experience that you may have had. And I think that goes back to maybe an involvement you may have in the community, or maybe at your university or school taking courses. And I think the last thing I would really encourage is get someone that you trust their writing skills, and really view them as, maybe this can be your advisor, this can be your parents, this can be your friend, who can actually critique on your final draft of your resume. Because I think you want to make sure that you are perfect enough so that it can really get that foot in the door. Some of the don'ts, and I think this is also really important, because believe it or not, I mean, not that many, but I have seen some resumes where I think you just take a quick glance at it and you would know that, okay, this resume, maybe this individual does not know what's going on, or what he's actually really applying for, he or she might be applying for. So I think it's important that you are trying to avoid certain, what I would call it as maybe pitfalls as well. So it's not important to be colorful. Emboss or pop out a little bit more. I don't think that's probably going to, unless you are applying for maybe a job that might be specific to that. Maybe you're applying for a graphic designer, then it's maybe a relevant thing, or you're trying to maybe showcase some of your highlights to really show your skill set. But I think for most part, I'm assuming that the group that I'm talking to right now is the transportation engineering group. So just make sure that you're kind of like maybe being mindful of that. No need to use maybe any passive phrases. Don't exaggerate. I think it's important that you're also being truthful of what your accomplishments are or what you have done. And I think it's important to be articulate about that. But when I say that, having the skill sets and maybe having some of those keywords and the buzzwords is going to land you an interview does not mean that you're going to make up something that maybe you're not really good at, because it will maybe get you an interview, but it may not go well in presenting yourself if that is not really something that is a true statement. So I think you are the best judge on what your skills are and what you have done in your curriculum and in your work experience, if you have any internships or co-ops. And I think you need to make sure that you're trying to really represent that very well. Don't overlook on the non-technical work experience aspect. I think sometimes people may view that as, well, I don't think that's relevant. Well, it's not relevant, but maybe there are some other social aspects of that which may actually really attract and might be needed for a given job. You don't need to call it a resume. I think it's given when you put it together that it is your resume. And I think this is kind of like unique. I didn't have to deal with this maybe when I graduated back in 2005. I think LinkedIn, Twitter, I don't even remember if Twitter was that active back then. But I think if you do have those handles, which is very common, I think it's okay to use those, but make sure that you are being cautious about it. Make sure that your handles are professional. And I think if it is really something that is relevant to the job, then by all means, I think it's important to go ahead and put that out there. I would not encourage or even recommend maybe putting something close to like Facebook handle on a professional resume. That's just my advice. I think I've heard some other horror stories about that. So I think just to be mindful of that. Again, I think the other thing is don't really use any sort of frivolous or irrelevant information. You don't need the hiring manager or maybe the employer to know. They don't really, and again, this is in all good ways. They don't really care about whether you're married or you have X number of kids. I think those are the things that you can talk about it during the interview. I think that's probably maybe a natural thing to happen when you're exchanging the dialogue, but no need to include any of those information in your resume. Again, just maybe a quick recap on the pitfalls in the resume writing is it could be too long and hard to follow. And I think what I mean by that is if you're trying to put maybe paragraphs showing your objective of going after a job, and if it's not a short and sweet sentence and it's more about you're trying to write maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs defining that, then I think that's basically just going to be rejected outright. Any sort of typos and grammatical errors, I think that can actually also be, depending on the hiring manager, I think they can actually, and depending on what you're going after, they can look at that as maybe a negative. Again, if you're trying to be too wordy or verbiage, then I think that can really show that maybe this is not really something that is concise, clear. It does not give enough time for the hiring manager to be able to review that, and I think they're probably going to just move on. You don't want it to be too sparse or not have enough information in there. Maybe if you're trying to be too generic or maybe being too modest about your accomplishments, I think put that angle in there. I think it's important that you are really talking about this is your opportunity to really showcase the outside world why you should be the perfect candidate for that given job. And I think that's really something that you need to be mindful of. So don't be shy of including things that are really relevant and really appropriate for you to include to show your worth. And I think that will definitely help you get through that screening process or the first impression, what I call it, the first impression screening process of a resume. Again, you don't want to be too snazzy. And I think what I mean by that, again, it's you don't want to include information that you don't want. It's not relevant to the job, and you don't need to worry about maybe adding any extra details that the hiring manager may not actually care about. And I think when you're going through this process, it may actually sound daunting, but it's really important that you enjoy this rewarding experience and the rewarding process, because this is really an important aspect and experience for your career. It's almost like starting a engine of your car, where you know that it's going to let you begin your journey, and it will take you to amazing career destinations. So really embrace that. You need to keep track of your accomplishments as you're going through. Make sure that you're fine-tuning your resume periodically. You may be an undergraduate student, and you are involved with maybe helping out maybe the graduate students with a lot of activities throughout your 4-year curriculum. And I think it's important that you do list out things that you may have done, maybe with an advisor, maybe with a group of researchers, and make sure that you are making a note of that in your resume. And same thing goes for graduate students as well. I think you may be involved with research work that actually has a lot of publications associated with that. And I think that might be one of the exceptions. I would want to point out that you want to limit your resume to 1 page for most part, but the exception would be depending on if you're going after maybe a faculty job. And again, I'm not the right person to really comment or critique or advise on that. I think we have amazing faculties here, Dr. Bullock and Dr. Sinha, who can actually guide you in that direction. But in that case, I think it's more about your curriculum vitae, and I think that's a totally different ballgame. You will have more than 1 page to talk about your research work and to talk about your maybe the publications that you had. And I think it's important that that is being captured a little bit differently. And at the end, I think this is really a fun process that will really embark you into some amazing opportunities for your career down the road. So I do want to leave with this last slide. I think this is pretty cool. The picture on the top left of Mr. Warren Buffett, which I think we all know. His and this is kind of like more on getting into the next phase. So his philosophy on hiring is intelligence, your energy, your integrity, your talent, which should be natural for the job. And it's important to note that he really claims that experience, knowledge, and skills are not on that list. And I've heard this from a lot of my mentors over the years as well, and my advisors as well, that people hire for attitude, and you can be trained for skills. But I think what is really important is that resume is the first step to get your foot in the door, to really allow you to do those giant leaps in your career. And I think we all know that we are proud Boilermakers. I'm hoping everyone here on the call is Boilermakers. If you're not, you're missing out. But I think with that, I just wanted to maybe close out. And Abdullah, I decided to keep it more of fewer slides so that we can have more of the interaction and maybe conversation. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to address that.
That is great. Thank you, Hardik. Thank you. So with that, we will open it here for people to raise hands and open it for questions. And we can get started with Sarah.
Hi, Hardik. So I'm in the process of kind of finalizing this resume business and doing the real job hunt. And I was just curious what your perspective was on objective statements, but also on the inclusion of physical addresses on resumes. I know it used to be something everybody had to put on there, and now since we're doing everything online, you know, some people say yes, some people say no. So I guess, what are your thoughts on, that's, I guess, two questions.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good question, Sarah. I think to your first question on objective, I really think it depends on maybe the job that you're going after as well, and maybe what you have in mind. If you are including an objective in your resume, make sure that you can also, again, keep it short, but to the point. But I think it's also important that you are making that objective more of something that you can tie to your skill sets. Maybe it's your analytical skills. Maybe it's something that you might have done. Maybe it's kind of like adapting to, or maybe going after challenges. Make sure that you do point out some of those words and try to maybe put it more of how it really meets your skill set as well, and how it will really help that particular job profile or the opening that might be out there. And I think to your other question regarding address, that's a good point. So I did talk to my hiring managers, like my HR and the talent acquisition folks, on a regular basis. And one thing that they do point out nowadays, I think you can see that people may be actually coming from all different parts of the world, and people may be coming from all different parts of US. And I think it's important to have your address in there. And I think it's for two reasons. Someone from California might be applying for a job in Indiana. I think it's important to know that individual, and obviously if you're applying, it's given that you are willing to relocate. But that may not be always the case. So I think it's important, because that could be one of the criteria in the search for HR. I think that can be, like, bigger companies may actually look at that and say, no, we need to focus on folks who are just local here. And maybe if it's address linked with the university that you're going to, which is local and not I would not recommend maybe using your home address if it's different from maybe what you have based on the university you are attending. I think it's okay to use your university address. And then some of the other conversations can actually come along as part of maybe the interview process. That's when you really figure out what really works. Is it a good match? But getting that interview is really the critical part. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I've gone back and forth for years about which address I use, and it really depends on where the company that I'm applying for is, because I'm cognizant that some people want local candidates.
Sure.
So.
Good question.
All right, thank you, Sarah. We have one more question from Raul.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I have two questions. I know the topic is resumes, but oftentimes the application comes with a cover letter as well. So my idea of that is to dissect the description of the job and try to highlight the matches between your specific resume and that job description. So that will be my idea for cover letters, but I wanted to know your views on that.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think cover letters are not a deal breaker, but maybe not all the companies and maybe all the hiring managers might be looking for a cover letter. So depending on how you are applying for the job, most of the time when you're applying through maybe the company website, they will probably have an option where you can upload your resume and then you can also upload maybe a cover letter or a statement, which can be optional. I would encourage that trying to limit the resume to one page is really important in that case. And then maybe any other details that you want to include, you can try to highlight that through the cover letter. I'll be honest with you, I normally go through and look at, and this may be different for different managers or folks who are hiring. I normally go through the resume itself to look for the content and really look for those keywords and the skill sets. And I think that's how I make the decision on whether the individual is going to be a right fit for the job that we actually have in hand right now or not. So cover letter for me is optional, but I think it could be important for some other types of jobs, or maybe it could be important depending on the company that you're applying for. They may actually make it more of a requirement. Then I think it's okay to go ahead and include that.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
All right, we have one more here with Ariana.
Yes, hi, thank you, great presentation. So you mentioned that companies want to see that the applicant isn't just well-versed in more technical things, but probably wants to know like more of the human side of things. And that's something I've always struggled with to fit on a resume, especially if a company specifies that one-page limit. So in terms of like volunteering initiatives or other initiatives that aren't really related to engineering, how would you suggest putting that all on one resume when you also need to include technical things? And if they all can't fit, should you kind of just opt to include as many technical things and kind of forego the more human traits just because the role is probably more of a technical role? You know, we as engineers are probably looking for a role like that. So yeah, how do you suggest that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it depends. I think my approach on that would be if you already have enough technical work experience to show some of those soft skills, that you did work in a team environment, you did end up maybe managing, or you end up doing maybe taking upon certain tasks as part of maybe a team, then I think those are the elements that will cover some of those soft skills that maybe the hiring manager or the employer might be looking for. If you do have something really cool on the voluntary side, I think volunteering work opportunities or maybe experience that you might have had, that actually goes a long ways, because as you can imagine, I mean, a lot of companies these days, it's not just about what you can do only on the technical side. It's also about how you are really ingrained in your community, how you can really be part of maybe a team, how you can be part of maybe helping out with a lot of companies. They do end up doing a lot of the extra community outreach and things within the maybe the state or the region they might have offices in. And I think it's important that if you have something that is really worthwhile sharing, I would certainly encourage that you do include that volunteering opportunity that may really provide a little bit more of what I would call it as an oomph to the resume, to allow you to really be looked at more as, okay, she's great technically. We can see that in half of the page of the resume, but she also has these other skills which are important for us and for our growth as a company. And I think that can actually really help you out. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does.
Hopefully I answered your question. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. We have one more with Rajat.
Hi, Hardik. These were some really nice tips. One thing that I'm really curious about is the role of research articles and research experience in general, because depending on the company you're applying to, it may be relevant for you to add many most important journal papers, and they occupy a lot of space. So I'm wondering how that would fit and how important that is usually.
So Rajat, I think on that, it depends on maybe the type of job you're going after. And I can give you just maybe a quick example. Like even within, if you're applying for faculty, that might be a different thing. But if you're applying for consulting, let's say, and if it's a consulting position with a firm that is known for maybe doing research type of work, then I think it is kind of like important. What you can do is you can actually include that publications. You can list the number of publications you may have had, like technical publications. If you have had maybe something that is relevant to that job profile, but it may not be covered up in one page because you have so many other cool things to talk about yourself. I think it's okay to maybe just list that you have X number of publications for with TRB, with JTRP, with whatever the organization would be. And then you can also make a note that says that could be available upon request. And I think that allows maybe creating a little bit more of the curiosity for the hiring manager, because now they know that, okay, here's an individual who has really good things to talk about, all this amazing work he or she has done. But it also tells them that, no, this individual has actually been involved on the technical space out front, writing these publications, and it really fits very well with this profile that we have. So we would really like to learn a little bit more about that, and we're going to call you for an interview. So I would go about doing that way. And then I think, as previously stated, maybe if there is an option for cover letter, you can actually include maybe a little bit more detail within the cover letter that can cover that particular angle. But if you're applying for a faculty position directly, I mean, that's again outside my area of expertise, but obviously that is going to be your number one. You need to include maybe a CV that has lots and lots of pages that can show why you can teach and create another cool engineer from a university. So I think that's kind of like my approach on that. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
I think here we're done with raised hand, and I have a real quick question here for you, Hardik, and then we can sum this one up. So, you know, as undergraduate students and graduate students, we tend to touch some of those softwares that they use in the industry, stuff like MicroStation, AutoCAD, high capacity software, Vissim, and whatnot. But we do touch them, we touch their surface, if I may say, right? Should we feel confident writing down in our resumes these softwares that we know them, but we're not experts? Something we should write or we should avoid writing? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think this is something that maybe I'll answer your question, but I was going to actually just comment on one thing. The use of certain tools has become so much of a big, not issue, but I think it's an important topic in the industry as well. I think this is something that has been discussed maybe at ITE, and maybe even talking about like are there things that can be done maybe even within the university curriculum where we can allow students to have a little bit more exposure, maybe hands-on training with those tools. And I know Purdue does a great job. Like there are projects, depending on the courses you're taking, you may be assigned, and I think you get a feel for it. I know there are software licenses that a lot of these companies, they do provide to the university to allow for maybe students to do research and whatnot. So I would really say that if you do have the opportunity to really take a course that has some of these cool software tools that are going to be relevant to your job and to what maybe the type of work you're going to do in the real world, I would really encourage you to really take advantage of that during your curriculum as well. I think that's number one. And then to your question, whether it should be listed in there, whether you have really a superficial knowledge about it versus whether you really worked on a project and you were able to develop kind of like your own skill set. I've seen a lot of kids kind of like really get into and learning certain tools on their own. A lot of the software companies, they do allow for that training courses and material available to maybe universities and students, maybe sometimes for free. And I think if you can really show that you have the curiosity and the energy to really get involved with something like that, that really speaks volume. And I think it's important to list it in there. You can list it out as maybe it's something that you are not very proficient in, but I think it's important that you can actually list out those tools. Because I think that's what really is when you get into the real world and trying to get into the practical side of things as well as you are working in the consulting industry. I think the very first day, and Abdullah, you know this as well, you've probably been on that side as well. So the very first day, I think you're going to get your feet wet. And I think there will be training that will be provided by all these firms. I mean, we do a good job of providing training, depending on what the skill set of an individual would be or the interest level would be. But at the same time, I think you need to at least have that curiosity in yourself to be able to really get involved with a tool and say that, yes, this is an area that I really want to focus on. And if that is the case, then you should list those software tools in there.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Hardik. Again, we are pleased to have you with us. And I think this was a pretty helpful session for all the students over here, as you may have noticed from the questions and involvement. So thank you again on behalf of our ITE chapter. We are appreciative of your presence with us here today, Hardik.
I have a question, Abdullah. I
Yes,
have
sir.
a quick question for Hardik. What is national practice leader?
So good question,
Yes, go
Dr.
ahead.
Sinha. So I'm just to give a brief overview. At Structure Point, I'm basically overseeing our entire traffic engineering practice company-wide. So I'm basically the national director for, we have offices in 4 different states. We also have offices, we do work in multiple states, but we have offices and presence in 4 different states. And I actually have staff that is spread in all those 4 states. So I basically see our entire national practice when it comes to the traffic engineering services.
Okay, so you're sort of a liaison or oversee.
I'm actually more in trying to grow our practice in all
Okay,
these different states. Yes.
Okay.
So I have operations lead working in each one of these design units. And then I basically oversee with the growth and the business development side of things in those offices.
Oh, good, very good. Keep doing. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Abdullah and Dr. Sinha and Dr. Bullock and all the kids, thank you again for your time. Again, I hope this was worthwhile. I think I had my contact information in there as well. So if anyone has any questions, maybe after the fact, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'm happy to maybe help and advise in whatever ways I can. It's always good to give it back to Purdue. So thank you again for having me, guys.
Thank you, Hardik. Thank you so much.
Stay warm and stay safe, everyone.
We'll try our best.
Yeah.
See you, Hardik.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.